Maybe that's better. Yeah, there we go. Okay. Hey, everybody, and welcome to Nerd Dad's Gaming Lair. Today, I want to show you something I've been working on in my spare time the last couple of weeks. It is a fully functional Minecraft computer. So that means that, in definition of computer here, it accepts inputs of binary data and makes outputs of that data and processes that data accordingly. So by your definition of computer, it's not like something you're going to sit down and play video games on. Definitely something though at the CPU level that is the core processing unit of your actual computer. Uh, it has all of the parts and functions thereof. So let me just take you on a quick little tour of this thing. There's several important components in your CPU. Uh, the biggest one being what's called the ALU, or the arithmetic and logic unit, which is comprised of a whole bunch of logic gates chained together basically to perform various tasks with the data that's input to it. So this one can do it's 8 bits at a time. So there are 8 processing bits. You'll notice these are replicas of each other here, and there's 8 of them in a string together. And what that is able to do is process 8 pairs of zeros and ones. So on this side, you'll notice there's a whole bunch of little, lights. The little like lamps that will light up when redstone touches them. Some of that's representative of a few things. There are 2 that are the 2 input buses. So it will set a 0 or a 1, so an on or an off, in those 2 states. And then based on some commands that I give the CPU, it will do various functions. It can add, subtract, do a bit by bit AND, which means it compares the zeros and ones. If there's 2 ones, it outputs a 1. If they don't match, it outputs a 0. And do a bit by bit OR, which means that either one of those 2 inputs can be a 1 and it will output a 1. It's also able to do carry. So as it does math, if it overflows from one bit to the other, because each bit in a binary number represents a certain decimal value. So as it overflows into the next decimal value, it can detect that and push it into the next bit and overflow up and up and up. So this was the first thing I created, was the ALU. It was a whole lot of work. So let me just take you through one of these bits and show you around. This right here is one of the input bits. There's another one over here. So this is the input bit for this particular comparator is what I'm going to refer to it as. This over here is the inverter for when I'm doing subtraction. The interesting thing about a comparator like this is it can only do addition. So there is no function in your CPU to natively do subtraction. But if you get what they've been able to do over the years, we've had computers for a long time now. What they've been able to do is come up with really interesting ways to solve problems like that. The one is if you add a number to a negative number, it's actually subtraction. So if I take 2 numbers, I put one of those binary strings on this one bit here, and then I invert it over here. So if it's a 0 on this bit, this other thing that I've got here will actually invert it to a 1. If it's a 1, this thing here will invert it to a 0. That way I can perform subtraction by actually only doing addition, which is pretty interesting. So the addition goes through a couple kinds of gates. I'm not going to get real crazy with those. Right there is what's called an XOR gate. There's a couple of AND gates over here. The AND gates do the bit carry overflows. Another XOR gate. There's also an OR gate. So these gates down here, I switched them on to do the AND and the OR functions specifically. The other gates are basically all dedicated to addition. Addition and overflows. So that exists for each one of those. Down here is the multiplexer. So you'll notice on the left, I've got this string of redstone that represents the output of my AND operation. The next one is the output of my OR operation, this first one's my addition operation. Second one's my AND operation. Third one's my OR operation. So depending on what I'm doing, how I have the ALU set to perform, which I'll show you here in a second, this stuff down here changes to represent the correct output for that. And there are a couple of command blocks here, and their function is to place a block under this thing that I can detect, because it's actually really difficult to just detect like a lamp being on. So it's better to change an entire block and check for a block than to check for the state of a block. So I've got those to perform that operation. There's two because I have to perform the inverse when it's 0. So yeah, that exists basically for this entire string of 8 ALU comparators. And at the end, I have a final carry bit with a detector, and that goes all the way. Now, I'm using 16-bit strings of numbers here. So I have 16 zeros and ones. I can only compare 8 at a time. Because I only built 8 comparators. So what I'm doing is actually this carry over here. If it lights up, will be translated all the way back to the front, and I actually run just 2 sets of 8 to make the 16 work. So the 16-bit front side bus can feed this ALU. It uses twice the number of clock cycles to accomplish that. So it's not super efficient, but hey, it's Minecraft. It's not ever going to be real efficient. The instruction set is very small. What are you going to do, right? You'll notice there's a whole lot of redstone pathways on either side of this thing. Let me bring you up to the front and we can show you what they're for. You'll notice they connect pretty much to all the output bits on this side. And this is the display for the output bus. So it shows me the 8-bit values that are current to the output of the comparators, the output of the multiplexers at the end of the comparators. And then there are 2 lights at the top there. Those represent my overflows or my carry bits at the beginning and the end of the comparator set. The set of lights down here is me actually polling this bus and building my 16-bit string on the bus to be transferred elsewhere. There's a few lights here. This is for my ALU state. Those 2 lights will light up in different patterns based on addition, subtraction, and or. And the other light right there is the ALU busy. I actually added a lot of busy lights. So each one of these lights at the end of my buses are busy lights. So I know that it's either reading or writing. Right here is my L1 cache. So this has 8 bytes of L1 cache in 4 addressable locations, and each one has a busy indicator. Here is 16 bytes, or no, this is actually 32 bytes of memory. So it's, not a whole lot of memory, but what do you need a whole lot of memory for in a Minecraft CPU? And each one of those has a busy indicator as well, so I can tell, which one it's being read from. This over here is my output bus. So you see at the bottom, there's the 16 lights with the busy indicator, and the output bus translates a binary number into an LCD readout here. Very similar to what you see on an old school calculator. That's about as good as I could get on Minecraft. There's not a whole lot of graphics going on in this thing. But at the back of it, you'll see it's just, a bunch of redstone blocks based on different patterns, and I write those in there based on the number I want to make. If you know a lot about CPUs, you'll notice one thing very critical is missing here, and that would be the control unit. So Minecraft is really difficult if you want to make an automated system like this to build out a fully functional control unit that is electromechanical. So let me show you what I did for that. I actually used Microsoft's make code. We'll open that up here. So this is the make code that runs the control unit. So each one of these things is a function. Most of it is, in fact, all of it is either binary conversion between decimal and binary, because I didn't want to wait for the CPU to do it. It would take a century to convert binary to decimal in the CPU. And the rest of it is all bus inputs and outputs. So when I'm translating, like I want to read from the memory and write it to the ALU to do some kind of operation with it, I could do that electromechanically with redstone, but due to the varying distances and the relay, every time you add a relay in redstone, it adds delay. So it's inconsistent delay. It'd be really hard to read and write that stuff. So I basically just built out every in-out operation in make code. Over here is what makes the LCD run. So based on a bunch of statements that detect 0 through 9, it writes that number on the LCD. I can call these in blue are all the actual commands that I can call from the chat prompt, and we'll run through those in a second. We're actually going to run the CPU here. This long blue statement here is a program that I wrote. And actually what it does is it calculates the exponents of the number 243 up to 100. So 243 to the 100th power is what this will calculate. It takes forever to do it, but it does it. So let's go back into Minecraft, and I'll show you how some of these commands work. And by the way, this is, it's pretty accessible. I did all this in code block. I mean, you don't have to learn a programming language. It's just a bunch of logic, really. I mean, it's not that terrible. It's pretty easy to pick up. The building of this was pretty simple. The gates, pretty straightforward. You just put them in the right orders. It's not too bad. Anyway, let's do some stuff. So let's say we want to add the number 1,000 plus 10,000, right? So what your computer would do is it would get that instruction from the program you're using, and it would send a bunch of bits to the input bus. So for me, the input bus is the chat window. So we're going to use the chat window as an input bus for the CPU. And then the CPU is going to handle it from there based on the instructions that we're giving it and some variables that we pass those instructions. So we're going to, first of all, let's start with the number 1,000. It's a decimal number. My computer cannot natively process a decimal. So I need to figure out what the binary value of 1,000 is. So I made a command for this. dec2bin 1,000. So what that's going to do is take the number 1,000. Let me do that one more time. Oh, there it is. I didn't have my chat up. So you see that it calculated the 16-bit string for the number 1,000 right there. So I've captured that, and now if I want to, the next thing my CPU would do is write that into its cache so it would receive it on the input bus and write it into its cache. So I can write reg, the register. I'm going to write it into register address 0. Now you'll see that register address lights up right there. And it's going to write my number 1,000 in there, which I actually already had the number 1,000 in there from the last thing I ran, so it didn't change the lights any. All right, the next thing your CPU would do is it would take the register, so it would read reg 0. So you'll notice that light lights up again, and I'm actually reading the register. There's what would be on my bus. Then it's going to write that to memory. Write mem at address 0. So what's going to happen? You see that light up? And then your memory at address 0 is written. Now let's get to number 10,000. We're going to go through the same process. dec2bin 10,000. All right, there's my binary output for the number 10,000. Same thing, we're going to write to reg. Now, we don't want to overwrite our use of the registry address 0, so we're going to use 1. So it's going to write to 1. Now you'll see the lights change there because it accepted the string that I output. Now we're going to read reg1, reg1, and we'll get that string, and we're going to write it into memory address 1. Write mem1. All right, so it writes it into memory address 1. So you'll notice we have those numbers in the memory, and we also have it on the register. Now the thing about the register and the L1 cache in your CPU is it's not really held onto. It's kind of an intermediary between the buses. So in theory, if I want to do anything with these numbers, I've got to read them from memory back to the register and then over to my ALU for translation. I'm not going to do that because they already exist in the register. So let's just say we want to add the number 1,000 plus 10,000. We would load these numbers from the register. So we're going to read register value at address 0, and we're going to get that string. And then what we're going to do is write that to the ALU at the 0 bus on the ALU. Now you'll notice the ALU busy light came up on this bus and it wrote my number. We're going to do the same thing with the number 10,000. We're going to read reg1 and get our 10,000 integer here in binary. And then we're going to write ALU1, which is the back bus on this ALU. You notice all the bits changed there. All right, so my CPU has officially received commands and translated all of the binary into its memory banks and then put it on the ALU for processing. So the next thing your computer would do is it would set the ALU to the right function. So what this does is it sets the multiplexers for the right output. ALU mode set, and 0 0 for me is addition, 1 1 is subtraction, 1 0 is and, 0 1 is or. So I'm going to pass it the options to set my ALU for addition mode. So what that does, you see the busy light come on, and these two are zeros because they're off. It also sets my carry to 0 and make sure that I'm not inverting these bits. You'll notice all my bit inversions are off. It sets my multiplexers to receive the addition subtraction bus, and we're off to the races. All right, now we're ready to do some stuff. So we're going to run the command ALU run, not RN, run 0 1. So I'm going to take the 0 bus of the ALU and add it to the 1 bus of the ALU, is what that's saying. All right, the ALU is going to go. So the ALU is going to go flush its buses. It's going to read. You see the read light come on right there. And then it's going to push that. Notice how this display is changing now. So it grabbed the first 8 binary numbers and put them on the working bus. Then you'll notice there's output happening over here as that happens. See it go? All right. And you'll notice this other light will come on whenever I'm reading that bus. See, I'm reading the outputs and writing it to a string here. All right. And once that's done, and all the buses are back to blank, we are actually done adding that number. So this binary value right here that we're seeing is what the result of adding 1,000 and 10,000 is on this ALU. So what good does that do us? It doesn't do us a whole lot because it's just binary sitting on a bus somewhere. Let's get that over to the LCD and see what happens. So we're going to read the ALU. It's going to go read that bus and output a array of numbers for us. Okay, so what do we do with that? We write that to the register, and I'm going to write it at value 2 so we don't overwrite our other ones. You'll notice that changes there, see? Yep. All right. Now I'm going to read reg2. So I'm going to grab that string again. Not that I really had to do that, but that's the way your CPU would function. And then we're going to go over here and put it on the output bus. So my command write out reads the currently bound string on the bus and does its magic with turning it into a decimal number and displaying it. Now you'll see in a minute. Yep, see 11,000 is my output, and look, 11,000 on my LCD. The LCD is a little janky. It's not as like high def as it could be, but you know it does clearly say the number 11,000. So that's it. All right, so you've seen a lot of the functions. There's a couple other things I can do. We can just use these two on the bus. I'm not going to reload buses. ALU mode set. Let's set it to 1 0. So you'll notice that light comes on. This should be an AND operation. In fact, I'll be able to tell you when it's done. That light comes on. That light sets everything. And then we are going to ALU run, and we should be AND operating the numbers on the 0 1 bus. Actually, that may not run because no, I took it. Okay, I had a dot there by accident. Okay, so it's going to go again. It sets all the stuff on the buses, and it gets all this from this ridiculous tangle of redstone paths. And it's going to do the same thing it did. It's going to come over here and it's going to write the data. All right. So the only one that was an AND, let's see if it's right. So this was an AND operation. It carried. It didn't fix the carries. So the only one that applied to an AND was 1 bit. So if your computer was trying to compare two numbers, that's what it would be. It's the same thing that applies to OR. OR works the same way. All right, so now let's do something a little more complicated. I actually wrote a program. I'm not going to go through all the machine code for you that runs it, but like I said, what it does is it takes the number 243 and calculates it up to the 100th power. So we're not going to watch it go up to the 100th power because that's really painful. But PRG runs the current program that I have captured. And that's going to go through a lot of things. It binary calculates a bunch of numbers. It's right into the register automatically. It's reading the registers. It's going to go write those into memory. Okay. Yep. It's reading that register. It's going to write it into memory here. Now it's going to write this register. It's going to do a binary conversion for the number 5. That was actually just something I left in there as a placeholder. Now it's going to read this, and it should, yep, it's going to write it into there. Because a number plus itself is a number times 2, right? So it's going to do that, and then it's going to go read the output bus here in a minute and put it back in memory in this location and just keep adding itself to the last result, basically. So it just read, it's writing to bus 2, it's reading bus 1 and bus 2. Now it's going to go put them on the ALU. All right, so it's putting the numbers on the ALU. We kind of saw this earlier. The ALU's bus is receiving that binary string. It's going to set itself for addition mode, and then it's going to run. So while this is running, we kind of know what this does already. See, we got our carries going. The carry is going to translate over to this bit here. While we're doing this, let's kind of go look at the functionality. You see how different strings of redstone light up based on the inputs up here? Like this one, for instance, the carry light's on, but both lights are off, so we get a 1. If both lights were on, we'd get, or one of the lights was on, we'd get a 0, and then we push a carry to the next bit. And the bit would just float up to the top as far as it could go till it hits the carry out. Okay. I think it's going to do a readable operation here. Yeah, there it goes. Yeah, 486 is that number times 2, and my LCD is changing itself to 486 to represent that value. So it told us that 2 times 2 is, or 2 times this number is 486. Now it's going to go do the whole thing again, but see how that bit shifted there because it multiplied times itself. A lot of CPUs have a function called bit shift that does this specifically. Mine does not due to the really rudimentary instruction set that I'm able to create here. So I actually have to do the math operation for this. But it's going to load these numbers back into the bus. See, it loaded that number back into the bus, and it's going to run the whole operation again, over and over and over 100 times to get that number to the 100th power. It's just going to keep adding it to its last result, adding itself to its last result. There's a whole lot of redstone comes on and off on this thing. It's a pretty complex, system of redstone in these things. There's lots of, crevices in here that I had to find a way to do traces through that didn't interfere with other redstone components. There's probably a better way to lay this out if I wanted to make it really three-dimensional. I could do each thing on its own plane potentially, but the way I started was I started with some simple elements and then I grew into this. So it kind of just grew to its own size. And then I duplicated it a bunch of times by hand, and then I connected all of this trace together and added a whole bunch of repeaters so that it would get up to the display boards. Yep, 729 for this. So it's just going to keep doing that over and over and over and over again. You can do the same thing for division. The one thing the CPU, not one thing, one of the things the CPU cannot do is floating point decimal conversion. So I'm going to work on that. I don't have floating point in here yet. So I can't really do division because in division a lot of times you have a remainder. You don't have to worry about remainders with most subtraction and definitely addition. See, that whole thing came on there because both bits are on and I'm carrying. Anyway, so I don't have any ability to process floating point numbers, so decimals are out right now. I'm going to get this thing to do division at some point. Also, I want to be able to write like a true and a false, or an add and an or an error to this screen based on the outputs, because there are times this, being that it's 16 bits that I can process, I believe the maximum value I can put through this thing is like 65,000. 65,000 something. I forgot the last 3 numbers. So if the product of my numbers comes out over that, I actually cannot handle it. I have nowhere to put that data. It falls off the end of the bus. So I would be able to catch that and then write an error to my LCD over there. So there's still a few things that I want to do, but it's a pretty good start. Let me know what you think. If anybody out there's done this before, let me know how it's gone. I'd be really interested to know. Yeah, 972 there. I'd be really interested to see how that's gone for you and look at your projects. If anybody's interested in the actual files for this, I do have them. I'm more than happy to give them to you. You can fiddle with it all you want. This is done with ray tracing. I have the ray tracing pack on this, but you don't have to use that. It's pretty because of it. You know, the glass is nice and dark. It's not all see-through. It's kind of nice, but you don't have to use that. If you want it, let me know. I think I can also export the mate code script for you, so you don't have to do this ridiculous amount of code block work. But yeah, anyway, I mean, this is basically it. This is what your CPU is doing right now as you watch this, whether it's on your phone, on your computer, any digital device nowadays, even calculators. Calculators used to work completely different, and they didn't actually process binary numbers. Today, basically, they all process binary numbers. So anything that processes binary would be known as a computer, and the thing you're watching it on right now is actually doing this hundreds of thousands of times a second, in the gigahertz level, not the 20 hertz level, and turning that into something that you're able to look at, which is pretty interesting. It's crazy how that works. But anyway, thanks for watching. This has been Nerd Dad's Gaming Lair. I know it's a short session. We'll do some more work to this, and I'll keep you guys updated how it goes. But definitely leave me a comment with any thoughts you have about it. If you want to see some of the files or some of the code or have any questions, definitely leave me a comment. And be sure to like and follow our Facebook page at facebook.com/NerdDadsLair. And we will catch you nerds later.